Hello everyone, and welcome to the GTAC Tech Talk webinar on the new system configuration for a security center system. Thank you for attending the webinar today. My name is Derek Schaefer. I'm a technical training e-content specialist with Genetec, and I'll be presenting the webinar for you today. We also have some members of the Genetec Technical Assistance Center standing by who are assisting with the webinar questions and answers. Our first GTAC expert is Nancy Potel, who is one of our technical support specialists, and she'll be answering any video-related questions you may have. And we also have Abraham Rodriguez with us for the webinar. Abraham will be helping with any access control questions. And of course, running the show and helping with questions as always is Scott McFall, who is an e-content specialist with the GTAC. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can just type them in the question box of the GoToWebinar console, and somebody will get back to you very soon with an answer. Now, in case we have to verify any information for a question, we're going to note the question down and who asked it, and we'll get back to you via email as soon as we have an answer for you. All the questions and answers from the webinar will be posted on the GTAC Tech Talk section of the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal forums about a day or two after the webinar has finished. If you have any additional questions or comments on the webinar or the GTAC Tech Talk webinar series in general, you can post them in this section of the GTAP forum as well. All the videos from the previous webinars can be found by going to the Tools section, then going to Videos, and you should be on the GTAC Tech Talk section by default here. Now there's two ways that you can watch the videos, either streaming in a web browser window by clicking on this icon right here, or you can download a zipped Windows media file by clicking on this icon right here. Now if you would like to receive emails concerning the latest additions to the Genetec Technical Assistance Portal, you can log into the GTAP, go into the My Account section, click on Email and Notifications, and then modify one of the sections right here. From the Notifications section, you can check the boxes of the subjects that you're interested in, but you're going to have to make sure that the frequency is set to daily or weekly, otherwise the options here will be grayed out. You can also edit your subscription to the two Genetec newsletters in the email subscription section from the same page. And of course, don't forget to hit the submit button on the bottom just to save any changes you made on the page. Okay, before we launch into setting up the Security Center system, let's take a quick minute just to go over the goals of the webinar and what we're hoping to accomplish. So the main goal of the webinar, of course, is to show the basics of setting up a Security Center system, either for a small installation or as a demo system as well. Now there are some topics which are intended for larger systems or may take up too much time to cover, such as setting up the directory manager, for instance. So some of these topics we've covered in previous Tech Talk webinars as well. We also wanted to look at a system where we're using Omnicast, Synergis, and AutoView together, and what order to set up the units and related entities. For the sake of time, we're going to skip the installation and licensing steps. Those are well documented and shouldn't be too much trouble on a basic system. Now also, due to the broad span of the webinar topic, we're not going to go into detail on every option for every entity. We're only going to look at the options that are specifically needed for a basic system. If you need more information on advanced topics, you can find those in the Administrator's Guide. Now, last thing before we move on to the agenda is that we decided to make this a two-part webinar. So basically, if we went over every topic, it would take a lot of time, or really we wouldn't get into enough detail to be useful. So we're going to continue with part 2 in March. Alright, so let's take a look at the agenda, which is really just a list of tasks we need to perform to set up the system in a logical order. Now this is what we're doing in part 1. If the list looks familiar, we did discuss this order briefly in the webinar on best practices on optimizing the installation of Security Center 5.1, but we have made a few changes to the order here as well. These are all the basic steps to cover, which we'll get into in just a minute. So we don't really need to describe each one at this point. Next month, we're going to have part 2, and we'll go over the second half of the setup process, which will cover things like adding doors, adding card holders, and configuring alarms. Okay, so the first step we're going to take a look at isn't a complicated one, but it is very important and should be done right away. The admin account doesn't have a password by default, so let's take a look at how to set one up. The admin account is, of course, your master account to get in the system, and as a result, there are a lot of options that are enabled and cannot be modified, like the user level and the set of privileges here. But we can change the password, and we can also add an email address to the account if we need to. To set this up, log into your config tool and open a security task specifying the users section. Now there may be a few users set up by default if you have the AutoView component on your system, so choose the admin user from the entity browser on the left-hand side. Once we have it selected, click on the Properties tab on the top of the main section here. And from here we can change the password by clicking on the Change Password button, and it's going to ask us to confirm the new password. Now if you'd like, we can also set up the password expiration time or set up a mandatory password change, which forces a user to change their password on logon. As we can see, we can also set a email address that can be used for sending messages and reports to a user. Alright, now before we get into adding roles and cameras and users and all that, we need to take a look at the network structure of the system and how the entities are connected to each other. We do that through the network view. There are two basic components to the network view: networks and servers. The network entities represent the different networks that your servers are connected to. Everything is grouped under the default network, which cannot be deleted, and is also used as the root of your tree structure here. Now if you have servers connecting over multiple networks, you'll have to create additional network entities for each network. This allows you to determine how the servers and entities associated with them will communicate with each other within the networks, and also communication between the networks. The servers are the actual servers that have been added to the system, such as expansion servers for hosting other roles. Now you don't need to add an entity for the servers. They're automatically created when the Genetec server service on a machine connects to the main server on the system. From our tree here, we can see which one is the main server because it'll have the globe on the server icon right here. Now looking at the network properties, the capabilities field determines what kind of video traffic the network can handle. This can be set to multicast, unicast UDP, or unicast TCP. A multicast enabled network requires additional hardware features, but is the most efficient for streaming video. Unicast TCP is the least efficient method. When the network is looking at the routes between the network points, it will choose the most efficient method that both networks can handle. Now let's have a look at a quick example of a system with two servers that are on different networks. Our two networks here have the IPv4 prefixes of 10.0.17 and 10.0.19. Now the .17 network can handle unicast UDP traffic, while the .19 network can handle multicast traffic. So for example, if two client workstations within the .19 network request video from a camera that is also on the .19 network, everything is contained here and it will be sent in multicast to the clients. Both of these are branches of the default network, which by default only handles TCP traffic. Now, where the routes come into play is if somebody is requesting video from outside their network. So if someone from the .19 network requests video from the .17 network, it will be sent in unicast UDP, since that is the most efficient transmission it can handle. We have our limitation here of unicast UDP on the .17 network. Now, if we have users connecting over the internet or from another network that's not within the .17 or .19 networks, it will be considered in the range of the default network, so basically outside of either of these two circles here, and all network transmissions will use unicast TCP. Now, if we don't have the network's view set up correctly, we could see some adverse effects such as network flooding or lost video streams as well. Now, on a basic system, you'll most likely only need to set with the network capability, which is set to unicast UDP by default, and possibly the IP address prefix and the subnet mask down here. This information is still good to know if you want to expand the system or if you want to use an expansion server on another network. Okay, the next step is also important for the long-term structure of the system, but from a system security point of view. We're going to look into setting up our partitions at this point. Partitions are used for dividing the system into logical security groups. Now, we're not looking at dividing things up based on the physical location or grouping them based on any kind of entity type. We can use areas for that. We're specifically making groups to limit who can see the entities within those groups. Now, this is something really important to address early on. Assigning a partition while creating an entity is easy, but if you put everything into one partition and decide to divide it up later on, it can be a little bit of a headache. By default, we have the public partition built in, and I'd just like to take a second to describe what this really is and what it should be used for. So if we're looking at partitions as boxes and putting each one of our entities into one or more boxes here and restricting who can look into the box by these lines here, then we can consider the public partition to basically be a box made of glass. It doesn't act like a regular partition, which disallows users who are not in the accepted list from viewing it. Everyone can see the entities in the public partition, even if they're not an accepted user for the public partition. Now, in terms of usage, if you have an entity that you want everyone to be able to see and put no security restrictions on who can view it, then that entity can be a member of the public partition. For everything else, we should create partitions based on the security access and assign entities, which are known as partition members, to these partitions. You're also going to have to assign accepted users, who are the users and user groups that can view the entities in that partition. We can make some of these users partition managers so that they have the ability to modify which entities are members of the partition and which users and user groups are accepted users. Now, in creating a partition, there's one other default partition type you'll see, which is right here. It's the system partition. Now, this is a hidden partition which is only visible to the admin user account and members of the administrator's user group. This is a really good place to keep covert cameras or other high security entities. The system partition is also considered the base of the partition tree. So to make a partition in the main branch of the partition tree, create it under the system partition. Now, with partitions, we can also nest them within other partitions. So let's take a look at an example and create our security structure using partitions. Now, as a smaller example, we're going to take a look at a bank branch here. Planning ahead, we know we're going to have 3 levels of security. The highest security will be for the camera entities in the vault room up here. We don't want anyone to see those except system administrators. We're also going to have a medium level of security for the office cameras around the bank. And those are going to be viewable only to the branch managers. Of course, finally, we have our public-facing entities, such as the cameras in the customer section here, and the doors to the offices. Now these are all going to be viewable by anyone logged in the system and specifically monitored by the security guards on duty. Now we're going to start with our high security camera entities, which are in the vault here. If we wanted to separate the system administrators from the vault managers, we could create a new partition with the name high security or vault. However, in this example, we'll say anyone who is an administrator should see the high security entities. Since we're using the administrators group as the security division, we can assign those camera entities to the system partition. We can tell if an entity is in the system partition if there are no partitions in the relationship list, like we can see for this sample camera here. Now actually for cameras themselves, it's a little different because what it'll do is assign it to the public partition, and you'll just have to add it, or in this case, just remove the public partition or any other partition, and that means it will be in the system partition. Alright, our next level of security is for the branch managers, who will be able to see the office cameras. For client confidentiality reasons, the cameras are not visible to the security guards. Now, since we only want the users in the management group to see those cameras, we're going to create a partition called confidential. Later, when we add the cameras, we're going to add the office camera entities to this partition, and this partition only. When we create a user group for the managers, we're going to add those in the accepted users list. You see we created our branch managers there. Now, if we want them to be able to make changes, we're also going to make them partition managers, so you'll see that's checked here. Otherwise, we can leave that responsibility up to the administrators group. Now, the last set of entities we want to look at from a security perspective are the ones in the customer section of the bank, and the doors to the offices, as well as the door to the vault. Now, we want anyone logged in the system to be able to view those cameras and doors in case they spot any criminal activity in progress or unauthorized access. Now, since there are no restrictions on who can view them, we'll put them in our glass box, the public partition, so that the administrators, managers, and the security guards can all see them. Now, note that the divisions have been made based on the security level of who's viewing them, not based on the geographic location or any kind of grouping method. If you wanted to put strict restrictions on who can view certain entities, there's no, and you're not going to have any overlap in the security levels. Basically, none of your entities would belong to the public partition. The minute you make an entity a member of the public partition, everyone can view it on the system. Okay, our next step is looking at creating our schedules. Now, this step is a little more flexible in where we place it, but if you're going to be creating and configuring entities that use schedules, it would probably save you some time to have them set up first. Now, there's a few places that we can use schedules. The most common uses for schedules are setting when an archiver or camera should use a certain recording type, and for specifying when certain access rules should be in place for a door. We can also use them to tell the system when an alarm can be activated and when a user is allowed to log into the system. Schedules can be used to both allow or deny access to a user or access point. So when we're setting up our schedules, we need to make sure we know what it will be used for. Now, for example, let's say we want to set up an access rule for the cleaning staff of the building, and they're allowed in any time except on holidays. Now, instead of making a schedule with all the days that they're allowed in, which we would have to highlight everything here, we would simply create a schedule with the specific days that they should not be allowed in. So in this case, we have all our holidays mapped out here. And when we're setting up our access rule for the cleaning staff, we would make sure that the schedule is set to deny access to the cardholders on our holiday schedule. Now, let's take a look at the different types of schedules and where they can be used. Now, the most basic type of schedule is the daily schedule, which uses the specified time coverage every single day. The time coverage can be set to cover the whole day, or it can be a range that you specify, or the daytime or nighttime hours. Now the range here does not have to be one continuous block of time. You can left-click anywhere to create a time block. Right-clicking removes the time blocks as well. Now the hours are broken into 15-minute blocks by default, but by clicking on this icon right here, the little eye icon here, it'll switch to high definition mode, where you can specify the time range down to the minute. Now if you do choose the daytime or the nighttime coverage, you can also specify an offset to the sunrise and the sunset times. Okay, we're going to have a look at the weekly schedule type next, which runs the same schedule every week and allows you to specify different time blocks for every day of the week. Once again, you just need to left click and drag to create time blocks, or right click to remove time blocks. So if we decided we need to change the schedule and we want to cut it off at 7 here, I would right click and remove these blocks right here. Now we also have the high definition icon right here, so we can choose the time blocks in 1 minute increments here. The next type of schedule we're going to look at is ordinal. Now here we're going to need to add specific days to the list and choose the time coverage that will be used for that specific day. Now of course it's going to be empty when we first create it. We just need to click on the add button on the bottom to add a day. Or once you have some days in there, you can select a day from the list and either delete it using the X button here, or edit it using the pencil icon. When we click on the add button and we're adding days to the list, we do have a lot of flexibility here. So we can either choose to add a specific day, such as the 8th of May that we selected here, or we can specify which day of the month to use based on the weekly position. So for example, let's say our payroll was being done on the 2nd and 4th Thursdays of every month, and we wanted the cameras around the payroll offices to record all the time on those days. So we could set up an ordinal schedule like this, and we can apply it to a continuous camera recording mode for the cameras around the accounting department. So for the camera, we selected the recording mode, the recording tab, and then we added another schedule. We're using our payroll days schedule, and we're going to set the recording mode to continuous. Now when you're looking at the schedule here, you can change the time coverage as well, just in case you want to modify it to only include, let's say, business hours in this case. Now our last type of schedule is a specific schedule. We saw this when we were setting up our holiday schedule. Now similar to the ordinal schedule, we can click on the add button, and it's going to bring up this pop-up calendar here, and then you can basically click on the days to add them to your schedule. We can also use the arrows up top here to change which year we're in if we want to set something up long term. Now once the dates have been selected, we can close the calendar here, and it's going to update the list with all the dates we selected. Just like the ordinal schedule, we can click on a date in the list and we can change the time coverage for that day if we need to. Now one thing we saw in our example with the accounting camera is multiple schedules in place. Now we have our default always schedule in place to record on motion, and we also have our ordinal payroll day schedule that we put in there as well, which does overlap with the always schedule, because always is of course all the time. So how is it going to choose which schedule to obey and which recording mode to use? The rule is basically a more specific schedule will always take priority over a more general schedule. Now the always schedule here, you don't get any more general than that, so any other schedule will override that one, so it's got the lowest priority. Now looking at the list here, we can see that the next lowest priority is of course the daily schedule, and a specific schedule has the highest priority right up top here and will take precedence over any other schedule that's in place. Now, if we happen to have two schedules at the same priority level, such as two weekly schedules that have overlapping times, you'll need to clear up the conflict manually. Cameras that do have conflicting schedules will turn yellow in our entity selector here, and you will be able to identify the conflict from the diagnostic information. So once we have, if we have the camera in yellow, we click on the Show Diagnostic, it's going to give us this information here. And it's going to give us the recording schedule conflict was detected, and it's actually going to tell us which ones are in conflict as well. So that's something you just need to clear up either with the schedules themselves or remove one of them from the camera, from the recording tab here. Now we're going to talk about how to apply the schedules when we get to the entity creation and configuration sections in just a few minutes. Now once we have our schedule set up that we're going to need, our next step is to take a look at the roles and the role configuration. Before we do that, we need to consider what we're doing with the system and if the default roles will do everything we need them to. In some cases, we may want to add some additional roles to the set of default roles that are present on the system. So for example, if you're going to be using an auxiliary archiver to create a second set of video archives for selected cameras on the system, you're going to need to create a role for it. If we had a second Security Center system on Security Center or Omnicast, then we want to create a federation role for whichever one that we're creating there. To create additional roles, we need to open a system task, specifically in the Roles section. Click on the Add an Entity button on the bottom and choose the type of role to create. It'll prompt you for any information required, such as the database server and name to use for the auxiliary archiver, or the name of the directory and connecting credentials for a federation role. It will also prompt you for the name of the role, the description, and the partition. This is a fairly common screen you're going to see for most entities that you create in the system. Now we're looking at the partition management. Most of the time you'll put the roles in the public partition for a smaller system, with a few exceptions. Now if we need to make any changes to the values we entered when creating the role, we can usually take care of that through the Role Properties or the Resources tab. For example, if the password changes for the user we're using to log into a federation role, we can modify that in the Properties tab of the federation role. So there's no need to delete the role and re-add it and change the password. Just go to the Properties, clear it out, and retype a new password right there. Alright, once we have the additional roles added, let's take a look at what we need to do to configure them, and specifically a few of the major ones that will be used on pretty much every system. When we're looking at roles, most of them will have a Properties tab and a Resources tab. The Properties tab is used to set the various options and configuration settings available for that role. In some cases, such as the Archiver role, there are too many options to put in the Properties tab, so other tabs are created to group the options into logical sections. The Resources tab here is used to define the system elements that are used by the role, such as the server the role is running on, or the database used by the role. So for example, we're looking at our Health Manager role, and we can see from the properties that we can configure which events the role will be monitoring. In the Resources, we have the server that the role will be running on, which is our primary server here, and below that the database that's used to store the information retrieved by the Health Monitor. Now if we click on the Advanced Options button below the server list, we can see which network card is being used by the server, and we can specify one if needed. In a multi-server system, we may want to add a second server in this section as well, so that the role will fail over to the second server if anything happens to the first one. So just hit the Add an Item button below the server list and specify the failover server. Just select it here, click on Add, and then you're going to see in the view here, your server list, the additional server has been set up. Now, just to note, you can't set up a server from this side here. It's going to have to already be set up and recognized by the system, which we can verify by taking a look in the network view. Now, most of the time we can leave the properties and resources using the default values for most roles, such as the database name. Now next we're going to take a look at 3 of the major roles in a little bit more detail. We're going to look at the archiver, the access manager, and the media router. So starting with the archiver, we have 3 tabs that basically are the properties for the archiver. So right up top here, the camera recording tab is where we can set up all the default recording options for a camera to use. When the camera entities have been added, we can choose to use these defaults, or we can specify individual recording properties for a particular camera. As we saw when we were setting up our schedules, we can specify the recording mode to use during the schedule's active times. And we can set up basically as many schedules here as we want. So we just need to hit the plus sign down here, and we can select a new schedule and a different recording mode. Of course, we just want to make sure there's no conflicts that like what we saw during the for the cameras there. Now, a few of the other options we might want to set up in this tab or change are the automatic cleanup here and how long the retention period is. The time to record before an event, which is in seconds here. The time to record after a motion event has happened, which is also in seconds. And the default manual recording length, which is specified in minutes, and that's basically how long it's going to record after you click on the record button for a camera in the security desk. Now, if you have a second server set up in the resources, turning on the redundant archiving option right here will store video on both archivers at the same time. Now, this is a little different than the auxiliary archiving, as the second server takes the same camera set and recording settings as the main server. The auxiliary archiver can actually, you can specify a different camera set from anywhere on the system, including federated cameras. Now, top here, video trickling is really only used in specific cases, so we're going to skip over those settings and we're going to move on to the extensions right here. So extensions are basically like video drivers for the archiver and tell it how to interact with hardware from various manufacturers. And when we're manually adding units, the archiver will automatically add the extension that it needs. Units from some manufacturers are added using automatic discovery, where the archiver will look at a certain port for any units that are responding and then add them to its unit list. So for those manufacturers, we need to add an extension manually and specify the port the units are using so the archiver can recognize them. We'll discuss that step a little bit more in the last section when we're adding our units. So if we need to manually add an extension, we just need to click on the plus button down here, the add an item button, and that's going to bring up our add an extension list, and we just need to choose the particular manufacturer from here. Now, if you need to change any of the extension properties, such as the port in use, just click on the extension, and the panel on the right here is going to be updated. So in this case, we have added a Bosch extension, and we want to make sure it's using the right discovery port. So we basically click on that, and we can go down here and change the port value right here. That's the one it's going to be using to look for the units. Now, if we need to change any of the extension properties, such as the port in use, sorry, just covered that. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next tab here, which is the resources. And this one's a bit more involved than the previous one that we have seen. So previously we just saw basically there's your server, there's your database. The archiver, it's a little bit more complicated, got a bit more to do here. So if we want to set up failover or redundant archiving, we can do it by adding another server right on top here. Just need to click on the Add Server button and choose the server that we want to add. Now, archiver roles can only have 2 servers assigned to them. We can have more than one archiver role assigned to a server, but in that case, you really need to check the database section right here. So if both archivers are using the same database server, we need to make sure that the archiver is using a unique database name. Now below the database information is the storage information. Once again, each archiver role should have its own storage to use. If two archivers try to share the same storage, there will be problems when reporting the storage statistics and trying to clean up the disk space. As well, you may find that the storage device cannot handle having two archivers trying to read and write multiple video files at the same time, which could result in some performance issues. Now this applies not just to the archivers, but any other software you have installed on the system as well. So basically we shouldn't have anything else that is adding files or changing the amount of free space on the drive there. For the individual storage devices, you can click on this icon right on the bottom here to add a network drive. Otherwise, all the local storage will show up on the list, like we have right here. Now you're going to want to change the minimum free space depending on the size of the drive. This is going to give the drive enough room to clean up the files when deleting old files, or deleting files on the fly if it runs out of storage space while recording. By default, all drives are set to 2 gigabytes of free space, but a good rule of thumb is to have about 2 gigabytes of free space for each terabyte of storage, which works out to about 0.2%, excuse me. Now, of course, there are limits to this. If you have a very large storage device, you can keep the minimum free space to a respectable level, where it can do all the maintenance without setting aside too much of the drive to do so. So if you have a 10 terabyte drive, the 0.2% might be a little bit high. You can probably reduce that a bit. Now, of course, the last thing to look at here below the storage list is the network card information and the ports that are in use. If you're setting up multiple archivers on one server, it would be a good idea to take a look at this to make sure there are no port conflicts on the second archiver with the primary archiver or any other part of the system, such as the media router. The next major role I want to take a look at is the media router, which is responsible for getting video streams from the cameras or archivers to the client. The media router basically makes sure the streams use the best path to get to their destination and does any network transformation in case there's a change in the route capability, such as from multicast to unicast. Now, similar to the other roles we've been looking at, we have our properties and our resources. In the properties, we have the multicast starting address and the RTSP port down here. So if you see any RTSP port conflicts in the system at any point, you'll want to come back here and check the port right here. We also have our redirector list up top here. Now, redirector agents are used by the media router to get the video stream from one point to another. Redirectors are servers that have been assigned to host redirector agents. Now, a redirector can be any server that's running the Genetec server service. If a server has an archiver role assigned to it, it will automatically be added as a redirector. If there are other servers on the system that you would like to use as redirectors, but they don't have archiver roles assigned to them, you can just add them to the list by clicking on the Add an Item button. Now, I mentioned the RTSP conflict before. Right here, this is another place you're going to want to check that. The media router is using an RTSP port that we saw here, but so are each one of the redirectors. So to see the properties of the redirector, select it from the list and click on the edit icon right down here. From here we can see the RTSP port that the redirector is using, and as well as the UDP port range in case we need to make any additions or changes to our system firewall. Moving on to the resources for the media router, there really isn't anything new to see here. Just make sure we have the database selected, and we can add any failover servers here if we want to. So we're going to move on to our last major role now, the Access Manager. Now, while the archiver is used to manage video on the system, the Access Manager is in charge of the access control elements of the system. Now, there's really a lot less to set up for the Access Manager though. So as you can see, we have our Properties tab. However, the only thing that we really have to set up here is how long we're going to keep the events for. Similar to the Archiver, we also have an Extensions tab right here. Now this is important to configure, as you're going to need to add the extensions for the hardware you're going to be using, such as HID units or the Genetec Synergis Master Controller. So to add an extension, just click on the Add an Item button down here at the bottom of the extensions list and choose the manufacturer from the list. The only thing you'll need to set up for the extensions are the ports that we'll use by the Synergis Master Controllers or SMC units. So we just select the extension and click on the Add an Item button on the bottom of the Discovery port list here, and it's going to prompt us for which port we want to add in here. Our Access Manager resources are similar to the configuration we've seen so far, where we set up the servers being used to the role and the database that we have in use here as well. Okay, so on to the next step in the configuration list, which is defining our custom fields. Similar to the schedules, this is something that can be applied to a lot of different entity types, so we want to plan it out pretty early on and have them available when we add our entities. To add custom fields to the system, we need to open a system task and go under the general settings and click on the custom fields on the left hand side here. Click on the Add an Item button on the bottom of the screen to add a custom field, and you're going to get this pop-up window for the information that we need. Now, custom fields aren't applied to everything in the system, so the first thing you'll need to do is choose what type of entity to associate the field to. Next, we need to choose what kind of data will be used in the field, such as text or a date. We need to give the field a name after that, which will show up in the Entity Creation Process and Custom Field tab. We may also want to define a default value, in case it will usually be a common answer and only change for exceptions. Now we can group the custom fields together by giving all the custom fields a group name, and you can give that group a priority as well. The last part here is pretty important, and it's to say who can actually see the custom field. So if you set up a custom field but it doesn't appear in the entity you're looking at, take a look to see if the user you're signed in with is a member of the list here. You can also add users groups. As you can see, we've added our security guards in this case. Now the admin account can always see everything in the system, so that user will always be listed here and can't be deleted. Alright, so let's take a look at a quick example. In our example, the guards at our site are always on the lookout for anybody who has left their lights on in the parking lot. If they find a car with the lights on, we want to give them an easy way to contact the owner. So in the custom fields, we're going to set up 3 fields for our card holders. So the first 2 are based on their car, and we're going to group them together. So the first one that we're setting up here, you can see we've selected our card holder, is for the plate number of the car. The second one that we're going to set up, you can see we've got plate here. After that, we're going to add another one, and we're going to basically set up the same way, but we're going to choose the car color as the name. Okay, so we've got those 2 set up, and we're adding a third one as well. And this is one that's going to be used for general purposes. So we're not putting it as part of the same group. We're not putting it in that car group right there. This custom field will be a phone number to use to contact them in case of an emergency. Now the first 2, we don't want to make them mandatory fields since we don't know if the card holder has a valid driver's license, but we could make this one mandatory so we can always contact the person if the lights are on or basically anything else happens that requires contacting them immediately. Now we want to make sure that these are available to our guards who are in the security guards group, so we need to make sure that we add the group to the user list for each one of the custom fields that we've created here. So if we take a look at how we add a card holder now, you're going to see these fields show up as part of the creation process. There's the card group right here, and then there's our mandatory one right here. And as well, after we've created the card holder, we can see them in the Custom Field tab from the card holder selection as well. So any values that we entered will show up there. Now just a quick note, if we want to create our own data type with a restricted set of values, you can do that from the Custom Field section of the System task as well. Only we need to select the second tab, which is the Custom Data Types tab. You'll see that on the top right. So when we do set it up, you're just going to need to set up the name. So in this case, we want to be able to choose a set of colors and the type of field it is, which would be text. And then we add the data values that are we want to be selected. So in this case, we're adding a different group of colors here in case we wanted to have specified car colors or anything like that. We could actually set something up like that in the custom data type. Okay, we're going to move on to adding our users and user groups to the system now. So as you'll see, we're going to be using our custom fields and schedules, so it's a really good thing we've got those created already. When setting up your users, it's a lot easier to create groups for them and assign the security values and privileges to the group. If you need to make a change to the security settings later on, you only have to change the group and not go through the settings for each individual user. Users and users groups are set up from the security task, which is the same place that we set up our partitions. From the security task, select the user group section from the top here. We still have that open from when we had our setting up our partitions before. Now there are some that have been added to the system by default, such as the administrators group and the patroller users group if you have the AutoView component installed. Now click on the user group button below the list on the left side here to bring up the creation pop-up window. Now of course we need to give the entity a name, and we can assign the group of users to a partition as well. Going to the next page, we need to specify if these users are accepted users of the partition or if they're partition managers. And we should be able to make they should be able to make changes to the partition membership if we add them as partition managers. Now as well, we have the privilege template right here. Now, privileges are rules that basically allow or deny a user from accessing parts of the software or performing actions on various entities. So, for example, we can set up a user's privileges so he or she can only get into the security desk and can bring cameras up in the tile, but cannot control the PTZ functions of those cameras. Now, we're going to take a look at that in just a couple of minutes, but what we can do from here is choose a basic template to start with, such as a supervisor or an operator. This can be modified later on, there's no problem with that, but at least it's going to give you a head start and not have to configure every single privilege from scratch. Now once you have the user groups created, you can click on the properties to add an email address for the particular user group, and that can be used for sending messages as part of actions, which we'll see in part 2. Now later on, if you need to change who has been assigned to the user group, you can do that from the Properties tab as well. You'll see the members is a list of users or other user groups here as well. Now the Security tab here has a couple of important parameters to check. The first one is the user level right here. Now that's basically used to block cameras from being viewed or block users from logging in. The important thing to bear in mind is that lower values indicate a higher priority in the system. So think of it like a golf score. Lower is better. So an example here, by default, it's going to give you 254. The level is 1 to 254. 1 is the absolute highest priority. That's like your administrators and everything. But by default, it puts everybody down at the last level here. Okay, also we can take a look at the archive viewing limitation, which is right down here. This is going to restrict how far back in video recordings a user can view. The default value here is 1 hour, So if you have users complaining that they can't see any video that is more than an hour old, it's probably due to this setting right here. For basic operators, you might want to set this to a limited time, but for system administrators or investigators, it would be a good idea to give this a higher value, or you can choose the unlimited setting as well. Now our last tab here is where we set up those privileges that we mentioned for the user group, but we're going to look at adding the users first, and then we're going to see how to set the privileges. Okay, so on to adding the users. We're already in the security task, so we just need to click on the users section up on the top left here, and then hit the create a user button on the bottom of the list here. The first thing we're going to need to do is give the entity a name, which is the username the user will be logging in with. We can assign them to be an accepted user of a partition from here as well. Hit the next button and we can fill out the user's name. Now since we have all our user groups created, if this user belongs to a group, we can select it from here as well. If this is an independent user, we can just leave that to unassigned as well. Down here is where we put in the password for the user, and then we just need to hit the next button. Now we're going to look at our partition rights now, which is similar to what we set up for the user group. Now if you're going to manage all the user's privileges from a user group, you can leave the privilege template set to none. This will mark all the privileges as unassigned, and any change to the user group will be taken by the user. If you have set up any custom fields, it's going to ask for the values for those next, and then we can just create our new user. Once we have the user in the entity selector, we can just click on them to adjust a few of the basic options. So first, taking a look at the Properties tab, we can set the email address for the user, same as what we did for the user group, and we can also set a few options for forcing a password change or setting a password expiration time limit. We can also set when the user is allowed to log in from the bottom section here. The always schedule has to be present here and cannot be deleted, but the standard schedule rules apply. So a more specific schedule will take priority over a more general schedule. So if there are two schedules that conflict here and they're at the same level, the block will take priority. So in our example here, if we want to limit the user to only log in during the standard business hours, we can set the always schedule to blocked, and then we can add our business hours, our work week schedule here, and set that as the allowed schedule. Since the weekly schedule is more specific and has a higher priority than the always schedule, it will allow a user in at that time. Moving on to our security tab on top, we have the same options as we did for the user group here. So if you need to make any specific changes or override what has been set up for the group, then this is the place to do it. If we need to make any changes to the values we set in the custom fields when the user was being created, we can do that from the Custom Fields tab. Now there are other options and tabs here as well, but for getting a basic system up and running, this is about what you'll need to focus on here. Alright, so let's take a look at the privileges we can set up for a user or user group. When we assign privileges, we can say that a user is allowed to do or see something is denied, or we can say that the rights to do that are undefined. We can use the last one we want to set when we want to set another privilege set to take priority or to define what the user can do. Now as well, what you'll see in the last column here is the inherited from. So if the user is getting any privileges from another, from either a group, a user group, or multiple user groups, you will see the influencing list right here. So in our case, the security desk was allowed based on our security guards user group that we've added the user to. Now when we're looking at the priorities here, a deny will always override an allow, and both of these will override an undefined setting. So if, for example, if we have a user who has the privilege to access the config tool set to allow in their user group, but set to deny in the individual user's privileges, then they're not going to be able to log in since the deny takes precedence. Now the privileges are broken into groups based on the application use and access, based on the administrative abilities, which tasks they have access to and operations that can be done from them, actions that they can take on entities, and a general group basically for anything that's common to a few groups, such as the ability to print and export reports. Now there's far too many to go into detail here, but the administrator guide has a description for each one. It's a pretty good list, so if you need to know what a particular one does, that's the place to take a look. Now one last thing to mention on this page is the set of privileges drop-down menu up on top here. By default, you're going to be editing the basic privileges, as we can see here, but you can also choose different privileges based on the partition in use as well. So if your user is an accepted user of partition, you can change what rights they have for viewing or editing the member entities of that partition. Alright, our last step for this part of the webinar today is to set up our units. The first type of unit we're going to look at adding the first thing we're going to look at is video units. So by video units, we're talking about IP cameras as well as IP video encoders that are connected to analog cameras. Now if we have a camera that uses the auto discovery feature, as we mentioned when we were setting up the archiver role, the discovery is very simple. We just need to make sure we have the same port on the unit as we do on the extension we added on the archiver. The archiver will take a look over the port specified, and if it finds any units, it's going to add them to the list of video units. Two of the more common manufacturers for this are Verint, which use vSIP ports, and Bosch, which use discovery ports. So for example, if you want to break up your Bosch units between two archivers, you're going to need to make sure you have two different discovery ports on the archiver extensions, and then set the ports on the cameras to match the archiver that you want the camera to connect to. In our example here, we have a Bosch extension on archiver 1 using port 1800. So for the units we wish to add to this archiver, we need to connect to the unit and set the port on the unit to 1800 as well. Our second archiver is using port 2200 in the Bosch extension, so the units that are configured with port 2200 will connect to this archiver. If we would like to manually add the units, we have two methods for that. The first is using the Discovery tool. We find the Discovery tool by going to the home screen of the Config tool. We go under Tools on the left here, and we need to select the Unit Discovery tool. Now from the discovery list that comes up, we can select the manufacturers you'd like to search on from this button right up here. And from here we can set the credentials for logging into the unit, as well as the IP address range. Click on the Start Discovery button and it'll search for any unit matching the selected criteria. Once it is finished, you can select a unit and then click on the Add Unit button right here to add it to the system. If the unit has different credentials than the ones specified in the manufacturer options, you can also select the unit and click on the Manual Add button on the bottom here. This is going to bring up this pop-up window and allow you to make any changes, such as pick a different manufacturer, the unit type, the IP address, or the credentials as we mentioned, the authentication credentials. Now it's going to automatically populate this information based on what is discovered from the unit search. Once we've got everything set up here, we can click on the Add button and then close it, or we can hit the Add and Close here to have it attempt to add the unit to the system. Now the last method for adding a unit uses a similar pop-up window prompting for the video unit information, which can be manually changed. The easiest way to do this is from the video task, but it can also be done from the logical view task as well, by clicking on the Add an Entity and choosing Video Unit from the Show All section. Now if there's a problem when trying to add the unit, a few tips are to try to ping the unit and connect to the unit's web page. If the connections are fine, verify the credentials you're using to try to add the unit and that the firmware on the unit is supported. Those are the most likely causes of issues when adding a video unit. Once we have the video units added, there are a few things we'll want to look at in the configuration. So from the video unit itself, there's not much you're going to need to change. The only thing we might want to look at is the Location tab. If the camera is not in the same time zone as the server, you can set a new time zone from here. You could also assign it geographic coordinates from this lower section here as well if needed. The majority of the camera configuration is going to be done from the camera entity that is attached to the video unit. The first tab we're going to look at is the Video tab, which contains all the settings for the actual video streams coming from the camera. The first thing to notice is the tabs on the bottom here. If the camera supports multiple streams, you'll see a tab for each stream and the name of the compression type associated with the stream, such as MJPEG or H.264. Each of these streams can have different video settings. We can associate different streams with different uses in the system, which we do through the Stream Usage section. To set the stream to be used by a particular function, we need to select the stream from the tabs below and click on the on or on-off button for the function in the stream usage here. So for example, in our system we don't need to view live video in great detail, but we want to have a good quality video archive in case we need to export the recorded video after an incident to give to any law enforcement agencies. Now since we have multiple streams available for the camera, we're going to say that MJPEG 1 will be our low quality stream and MJPEG 2 will be our high quality stream. The first thing we would do is set the live stream usage to on for the MJPEG 1 stream. We can also determine that the video viewed remotely and video requested at a low resolution will be using this stream as well. So we can turn both of those options on, and all three of those uses will be using the MJPEG 1 format. So looking at our MJPEG 2 stream, we want to associate that with our recording stream, and we can also associate it with the video requested at a high resolution. Now these last two settings here are used for dynamic stream switching, and which is an advanced security desk feature which takes into account the size of the tile that you're viewing the video in and basically selects an appropriate video stream based on that. Now we're setting up the stream usage first because our next step is going to be setting the video quality, which won't be present for any streams that don't have a purpose. The video quality is the resolution, the frame rate, and the other features of the video stream here. So we need to select a resolution from those that are available for the hardware that you're using, and either set the quality manually, like we did in this section right here by setting it to custom, or we can use one of the presets as well. Now if we wanted to test the video settings, we can just double click on the camera to view it in a pop-up window. We can use the drop-down menu up top here to select which video stream to view, and you're going to see the statistics below it update for the currently viewed stream. You can also click on the Show Diagnostic Information button here if you're having trouble seeing the video stream from the camera. In some cases, you may need to change the connection type from the network settings in case a particular type is not supported from the unit or there's a problem getting to the camera over the network using a certain connection type. You can do that down there from the network settings right here. Now one last thing you might want to set up from here is a schedule for the video quality. Now by default we have the always schedule selected, but if we want to apply a different video quality settings for to the stream at different times of day, we can add a new schedule and change the video quality settings from that tab. So for an example, let's say that during the day our site has guards patrolling the area, but at night all monitoring is done from a guard station. To To reduce the load on the network, we can lower the video quality for the always schedule and then apply a new daily schedule for any time that's after 10 p.m. or before 7 a.m. here. Since the daily schedule is more specific than the always schedule, the video quality settings that we set up here will take priority during that time period, and we're going to have it set to a better resolution and a better frame rate. Alright, so the next tab you're going to want to check out is the recording tab right here. Remember that we set these settings up in the archiver as well, so really we can either choose to inherit the values from the archiver, or we can pick custom settings, and we can select the settings down here yourself. Now moving on to the motion detection tab, we've covered this in a couple of different webinars, most recently in the April 2013 presentation on resolving common Security Center video issues, so I'm not going to go into detail on the actual settings. The one thing I do want to point out from this tab is that we can apply a schedule on this as well. On the side we can just click on the plus button here and we can add a schedule and put different settings. So for instance, if you know you want to do motion detection all day, but at night it's useless because of the lighting or other external factors, you can apply another schedule here and either change the settings or you can turn it off completely. That's another option right there. Now the last tab that you'll really need to use in a basic setup is the hardware tab, which is where we define any speakers and microphones attached to the unit, and we can set up the PTZ settings if we want. And we can also rotate the camera image depending on how the camera is mounted. This should be really all you need to set up your video units. If you're interested in using any of the other options, such as the visual tracking, take a look at the administrator's guide for detailed steps on how to set up those options. Okay, so we just have a few more minutes left here, and the next step is of course going on to our access control units. Once again, this is going to be done from the logical view task if you'd like, but more than likely you'll want to do it from the access control task under the roles and units section. From here we click on add an entity and we're going to choose access control unit. From here we need to select the type of unit, either an HID Vertex or SMC. If you don't see one of those available or anything at all in there, take a look at the Access Manager role to see if the extension has been added. We need to put an IP address for the unit, or for the SMC we can use a host name instead, and then we fill in the credentials for reaching the unit. For HID units, this is the root account and not the admin account. Hit next and we're going to see our partition selection list, which is where we want to add the unit to, and then we can just hit create to add the unit. The Access Manager will try to enroll the unit and will let you know if it's able to or if there was a problem. We do have a couple of webinars as well on how to connect and troubleshoot HID and SMC units from last year, so if you hit any problems I would recommend taking a look at those. Once we have added the unit, the main thing you want to check is the Synchronization tab. This is going to tell the Access Manager how often to send updates to the unit so it can make the appropriate access decisions based on the list of accepted cardholders. From the properties on an HID unit, you want to make sure the hardware is set up correctly, such as the contact type for any units and the minimum action time for output relays. Now the inputs are configured from the peripherals section for an SMC, and that's where you're going to need to go to set up your contact type for the inputs, to set up if it's normally open, normally closed, or the supervised or unsupervised states. Now just to touch on AutoView briefly, if you do have LPR units to add, it's very similar to the method used by the Auto Discovery video units. You'll need to make sure the Sharp cameras have a discovery port set, and then you're going to configure your LPR manager to use the same port. We do this through the Properties tab for the role, and it's under the Live section on the left here. So once the port has been set, the Sharp Discovery port, any Sharp units with the same port number should be discovered and automatically added to the system. If you're using multiple LPR managers to manage different groups of Sharp units, make sure each one is using a different discovery port. We also need to make sure we have the network ports open for communication, particularly ports 8731 here and 8001. Now, if these are fixed Sharp units, we need to make sure we have the matching option enabled right here as well. Otherwise, we're not going to see any hits that are coming in from the Sharp units. Once you've got that done, and the should be ready to go, and the unit should get automatically discovered. Alright, so that's the end of the information we're going to cover in the webinar today. We'll pick up with part 2 at the same day and the same time next month and cover the rest of the system configuration. I'm just going to leave the session active for about another 10 minutes or so in case you have any additional questions for Nancy, Abraham, Scott, or myself. And in case you need to review the webinar, or if you know somebody who'd like to watch it, we're going to have the webinar posted in the video section of the GTAP in the next couple of days. If you have any comments or feedback on the webinar, we'd love to hear them. When you close the webinar session, you're going to be presented with a few survey questions. We would really greatly appreciate it if you could just take a minute to drop a few comments in there to let us know how we're doing. If you think of anything you'd like to ask or you have any other comments, you can leave those in the GTAC Tech Talk section of the GTAP forum. In the next couple of days, we're also going to add the general question and answers that we've gotten from today's webinar. And as well, we're going to put links to the videos and a link to the PDF file of the webinar slides as well. Once again, in the forum, it's going to go in the forum section for the webinar from today. So once again, on behalf of myself and everyone at the Genetec Technical Assistance Center, I'd like to thank you very much for attending the webinar, and we hope you all have a very great day. Thank you.